Welcome everyone to the Stateless Atheist. Today I'm going to be going over a video from who used to be called Mr. Atheist and now he's calling himself Jimmy Snow. His channel, I think that's his real name. He's an atheist YouTuber that I've actually watched a long time and I have a lot of respect for. I think he's a great guy. He cares about people and he has a pretty open mind. However, while I watch a lot of atheist channels, they're good philosophically, usually, and scientifically, but philosophically when it comes to rejecting religion, they usually wholeheartedly accept the state. That's a problem. The two greatest fictions that we have in society is that the state is necessary and that God is real. And they're both used to control others. I want to get more within the atheist community to understand this. That's what this video is about. Let's begin.
Recently, you may have heard phrases like defund the police or dismantle the police. And I'll tell you, the first time I heard those phrases, I reacted with a furrowed brow, confused and sort of like, well, that seems obviously wrong. And what was happening was I was falling for the same thing that happens really to anyone who associates with a controversial cause or label or phrase.
What happens to me when I hear that phrase? My pee-pee twitches. Gets me excited.
I was taking away the nuance of what the phrase actually meant and injecting my own. And I was doing that even though I hadn't yet done a single moment of research. So before you cast judgment on the phrase defund the police, dismantle the police, whatever else, I'd like to do my best to explain it as I understand it.
And Jimmy, and this is the point that I'm making in the video, you need to continue your research. I'm glad you have an open mind and you wanted to correct yourself and you read more into it, but you'll see as I continue that I agree with you on a lot, but there are things I disagree with you on, and that's what this video is about. Let's continue.
And also, why I am a fervent supporter of it. I'm Jimmy Snow, let's do this.
I'm a fervent supporter of it much further than you are. As you said, let's do it.
Now, before we get started, I actually want to begin by talking about how frustrating it is to see people on all political sides, on both sides of the main political aisle. I understand there's more than the two parties, but the two affected parties, and even people that I agree with, completely misrepresenting or not even making an attempt to understand what it means. And it's funny because a lot of them will complain about the lack of nuance or how unnuanced the phrase defund the police comes out, but they are themselves, in fact, injecting nuance to do it. They're saying, oh, I see defund the police, therefore I say that means this, this, and this. And even if it's a very, very basic amount of nuance they're putting in, they are still injecting their own biases, their own nuance, their own definitions into it. And so really, to me, it is a decision made that I don't want to understand it.
I agree with you completely. A lot of people input their own definitions into it, which is not necessarily a problem. All definitions are created. There's no word that has come from nature or God that is handed to people. We all create our definitions through our usage. So there's nothing wrong with using our own definition as long as we define it. I also think that there should be a reason for it. Don't use it just to be hyperbole. Have a reason. Maybe you think the original definition doesn't fit reality best. While liberals are using defund the police to mean cut back on the resources, I use defund the police, and anarchists like myself use defund the police to mean get rid of them, and you'll see why.
And I've decided that I am the gatekeeper of what makes a good rally chant, and I don't want to understand what's behind it. What's extremely frustrating is when you see that come from people who identify as atheist, or identify as liberal, or identify as feminist. These are all labels I take on for myself, and people in...
I don't identify as a liberal. As an atheist, yes, I'm 100% an atheist. I'm 100%, I would say I'm a feminist too. I've never said those out loud, but yeah, I agree with most feminism. There's some radical, but there's radical in every group. But liberal, not at all, unless I'm partially a classical liberal. However, as I said previously, I'm also an anarchist. Let's continue.
Those camps all know firsthand how annoying it is when people take those labels and they go, oh, you're a liberal, I've decided that means X. Or I've decided I associate that with the most radical forms I saw on Fox News, with the least well-represented or least articulate explanations of what your values are. I associate it with that. And
there are certain values that come with every label. We can't deny that. A liberal, along with that, comes usually a belief that the state is necessary for equality. Just like myself, an anarchist, there are many different forms of anarchists. We don't agree on everything, but we reject the state wholeheartedly. That's given for any anarchist.
And unless you change to believing what I believe, I'll never associate it with anything else. Atheism means almost nothing. It's almost like the reverse of the problem, and people decide it means so much stuff. And they know, if you're an atheist and you consider yourself a skeptic especially, how is it that you aren't going, okay, I've heard this phrase, I'm having a somewhat visceral reaction or negative reaction to it, but I've only heard the phrase. But I'm an atheist, I'm a skeptic, and I know that in the past, when I have cast such judgment so quickly, I've sometimes gotten egg on my face for doing so, and that it is best, if I am a skeptic, to withhold belief until there's a good reason to believe it.
This is my problem with the atheist community. Yourself and many others. Like I said, I love watching you all. I learn a lot from the scientific perspective. Science, natural science is not my forte. I know it decent, but I still... And I like your arguments. I always pick up something new. But the skeptic community, yourself, Cosmic Skeptic, Jacqueline Glenn, Logit, who else? Armored Skeptic. There's so many of you. Telltale. You all wholeheartedly accept the state. Yes, there is some nuance in that. You accept the state is necessary, but you reject certain things that the state does, like police violence. Police excessive violence, let's say. You accept police violence, and we're going to go over that. But you don't accept police excessive violence. So, let's continue.
And you going, I think the phrase is silly? That's ridiculous. That is not a good enough reason to believe you know what the phrase means. It's even funnier, though, when you get people who are saying, well, you just say defund the police, as though like a chant like, hey, let's effectively dismantle and rebuild a system that hasn't worked now for hundreds of years, and let's start from the ground up, but let's do it in a phased approach that is reasonable so that we don't have any people lost in the meantime, because this whole thing is about marching for people who are dying, who shouldn't have died, so let's definitely not make more people die. And one of the ways we can do that is by taking a real effective look at budget. When do we want it? Now! Like, that's not an effective chant. And sometimes the people who are saying, oh, well, you should have a better, more nuanced title or chant. And by the way, defund the police, it is many things and it is many ideas. It's not all decided yet. It's an identification of a problem and a solution to the problem that we're still working on how it would work. But anyway, it's really funny when those criticisms come from people who literally chant MAGA or Make America Great Again. But
I totally agree with you. Trump supporters are terrible. I'm 100% against them. But I'm 100% against Bernie supporters also. And Biden, and Hillary, and Bush, and Reagan. I don't support the state. They're all terrible, just in different ways, mildly different.
Some of them just say MAGA, and you're sitting there like, you're right, I'm sorry we didn't put enough nuance in ours. Now, for people like that, what do we do? There's not much we can do. But for those of you who consider yourself a skeptic, but right now are uncomfortable, as many people are, there are times where I'm going, ooh, this is a lot to intake. Everything makes me uncomfortable. And we have a rapid onset of information, and I'm finding out there were things that, even though I tried to stay in tune with, I still missed an awful lot. Those are uncomfortable experiences. But it seems to me that you're running from being hypercritical and just hostile to absolutely everything, pre-decided before this whole thing started that I've already figured out all the truths about this and the reasonability of Black Lives Matter and everything, and therefore any new information coming out now, I'm not going to consider, even as I tell other people they need to do their research.
Yeah, I've already done a few videos, and I'm going to continue doing even more videos on the subject. I did one on Richard Spencer, a deep dive into his ideas, philosophy, and life. I did a video interviewing a Black libertarian and his experience, and I also debunked a Black academic who was arguing that anti-racism actually hurt the Black community. So I did those three, and I'm going to continue to do more to support Black Lives Matter, which is 100% necessary right now, because while I'm against the state as a whole, because they create political violence on all groups, they do still favor the white community, and there is such thing as a white privilege. Whites do get more favor from the police than other groups, even though we are repressed as well, just not nearly the amount that the Black community or the Hispanic community on immigration is, or the Muslim community on religion is. Even though I'm against Islam, I'm not against Muslims. So let's continue.
They need to consider my points. I refuse to do any of that, and if you can't figure out your three-word slogans in a way that I'm not going to dismiss, that's on you. It's a lot of arrogance, and it's non-skepticism. And there's not any one specific individual that I'm thinking of here. In fact, it actually brings me a little joy knowing that there's probably 5 to 10 people who have a high likelihood of actually watching this video and think I'm talking about specifically them. I am reacting to specific instances in my life, as well as specific people in my life, but also things I've generally seen. Things that are the narratives that are being generally put out there by people like Tucker Carlson and such. This is my Tucker Carlson face. Why does he do this face in every interview?
Yeah.
Oh,
you're right about that.
Oh man, so he needs to redub over every time he does that and put a sound in it.
Just let me say, before we continue, generally, I agree with the liberals on the problems that exist in society. The issue I have with liberals is not their premises. Their conclusions on how to solve the problems are what I have problems with. Conservatives, I generally disagree with their premises. Therefore, their conclusions are 100% off. I support 100% open borders. I don't think Mexicans are the problem. I don't think blacks are the problem. Black Lives Matter isn't the problem. SJWs, for the most part, really are a problem. Yes, there's a few crazy ones. Who cares? They're not a problem. Antifa, not a problem. More liberals need to start understanding where the problems are coming from. The problems are coming from the state, or they're exasperated by the state. And I'm going to give you a few examples as we go further on.
He looks like Beaker from the Muppets. All right, so let's talk about defund the police, and let's talk about, before the details, this. There are a lot of people who seem to think that by protesting for this, that means you are ignoring Y or Z, and that isn't the case. Racial inequality is a significant and systemic problem within policing. It is, however, not the only place that systemic racism occurs, And the solutions that are coming up are not meant to only treat systemic racism. But systemic racism has permeated into most of American society, frankly. And right now, if you were thinking like, oh, well, I guess if we solve this police issue, everything goes away, and now communities of color will have nothing else to complain about, which is not how I would just
100% agree with you. Systemic police is a big part of it. If we aim to reduce that, if we reduce that dramatically at least, even if we don't get rid of the police completely, which I'll show you it is quite difficult, but if we do reduce that, that helps education, that helps in so many other areas. It doesn't solve the problems there, but it helps. And how does it help? Well, if generally children of one-parent households have worse education outcomes. And if we continue to lock up the fathers, that will continue in the black community. But if we don't lock them up, two parents there, that will just increase the education level. It's not the only thing that's needed, but it's definitely one thing that is needed.
Describe it. I am channeling certain parties of people. Yeah, you're wrong. This isn't the only challenge. However, this specific challenge is something that is leading to more people from communities of color being incarcerated per capita, having just a huge number of black citizens in jail, also still basically slaves. We are talking about working for very, very little money. Slavery has definitely not gone away.
Well, they're slaves, but not because they're working for little money. It doesn't matter the amount of money you work for. That doesn't make you a slave or not. Slavery is forced labor, which they are. It has nothing to do with pay. If you ask me to do something for you and I worked for you for free, I'm still not a slave. But if you put a gun to my head and make me work, and you give me $1 million, I'm still a slave. So slavery is forced labor. It's irrelevant the amount of money they're paid.
But also how they are treated and policed and detained on the streets and the rates at which they are. When we look at policing and its effect on communities of color, it is disproportionate how they are targeted and how...
Yes, and that's why, one of the reasons why, not the only reason why, reducing the government is better. Just as a good example, I 100% agree that people should wear masks and we need to do something about COVID. But the government's not the answer. Just by instituting mask requirements within the public, it has disproportionately hurt the black community. Don't worry, I'm going to leave links for all of these in the description. Let's continue.
Those results are. But for those of you who go, what about Todd Totterson, who is a white guy who was killed in Whiteville in the state of Florida? I just was trying to think of a really white state. I used to live in one. Why didn't I just say Wyoming? How come you're not marching for him to say we are marching for Black Lives Matter where we see this issue doesn't mean we don't think police abuse.
I don't even remember his name. I talked about it in the debunking I did for the black academic who was arguing that anti-racism hurt the black community. Daniel, I forget his last name. Black Lives Matter just actually brought back up his death. So I totally agree with you here. They actually brought it back up into the public eye to try to get justice for him. So Black Lives Matter is not just about black lives. They are actually pushing more systemic problems besides just systemic racism into the public eye.
In other cases is okay, and these solutions that are coming out will address abuse across the board. So if those of you who are actually worried about Todd Totterson from Florida, right now would be a good time to join a movement that is going to address the abuse that is hitting them, and as a side effect, hit the abuse that the Totterson family had to go through too. By the way, I recognize those people don't actually care about Todd or Totterson. They just care about whataboutism. I would like to totally ignore this. So what about, you were saying it's bad when this happens, but you're not mentioning when over here happens. What about blank? Well,
I 100% agree with you. If they're so worried about those other people, why don't they bring it up when those things happen? 100% agreed.
Since you're not, I'll just ignore it. It's an unfortunate instinct that many people who oppose really any cause can find themselves doing, but we see it extremely heavily coming from propaganda groups like Fox News because it's what they're best at. This is also the person who propped up a person like Candace Owens, so white people across the country can go, oh, well, here's a black person who agrees with me. I guess every other black person's opinion no longer matters.
Yeah. Again, to add to your point, they very often say, oh, you're trying to shut down black conservative voices. Those black conservative voices are very often trying to shut down every other black person's voice. 100% agreed with that.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way, Keith. So, let's get into what defund the police means. Let me start with something that might be a shocker to you. It was never, and I mean never, it literally never meant, let's devolve into anarchy and not have police.
Okay, this is where we really start to get into a disagreement. Anarchy does not mean disorder. Yes, there's a colloquial usage of anarchy that means disorder. Within academia, anarchy means without rulers, not even without rules. Anarchy has rules. It just means absent a state and, depending on who you talk about, absent a hierarchical structure. And there's a couple other things depending upon the forms of anarchy that you look at. But it's not disorder, even within academia, which is actually becoming a big research program within academia. I could show you hundreds of books from academics. And I could continue to do that. There's hundreds of books, and they continue. They're not crazy nuts. They are actual academics that study anarchy. And even if you're not going to completely just turn and start rejecting the state, I wish I would get more skepticism out of the skeptic community towards the state. That's why I'm disagreeing with you here.
So to get started, there's a few things you should know. One, it's already been done successfully in cities in America. Two, there will still be police, but in many cases, hopefully all cases, you will see a greater amount of accountability to the communities that they serve, as opposed to other groups. So
let's stop there for a second. I got a great quote from you for the end of policing. While he doesn't 100% agree with getting rid of the police, here, listen to this. In the 20th century, two major areas of policing were eliminated when alcohol and gambling were legalized. These two changes reduced the scope of policing without sacrificing public safety. Prohibition had led to a massive increase in organized crime, violence, and police corruption, but had little effect on the availability of alcohol. Ending it reduced crime, enhanced police professionalism, and incarcerated fewer people. Similarly, fruitless attempts to stamp out underground lotteries, sports betting, and gambling proved totally counterproductive, empowering organized crime and driving police corruption. Government control and regulation of gambling has raised revenue and undermined the police of organized crime. By creating state lotteries, regulating casinos, and only minimally enforcing sports betting, the state has limited police power without sacrificing public safety. There's no reason the same couldn't be done for sex work and drugs today. The billions saved in policing and prisons could be much better used putting people to work and improving public health. And here, another book. Let's talk about how policing started. The police role in maintaining public order necessarily tends to have political overtones, but suppression of crime can itself be seen as a form of political repression directed against the poor. That's what the police generally are. Especially with the highest crime rates occur in the poor areas. It has been estimated, for example, that in communities in Western Sicily, 8 out of 10 men have spent over a year in jail, and a further 4% are outlaws. I'm going to add another link to the description from an ex-police officer in the United States who explains, I don't remember the exact percentage, it was like 90, 95%. He said he was a cop for over 15 years, if I remember correctly. He said he, 95% of the time, stopped crime. He was always there afterwards, and the 95% of the time, he did things that he didn't need to have an monopolization of violence in order to do. He was acting like a social worker or someone who just needed help. That's what we need instead of police. We need helping the problems, not policing the problems after the fact. That is not helpful.
Speaking of those other groups, 3, it would reduce the power of police unions, which right now are protecting the bad ones, are protecting the abusers. You get all these people that are like, a few bad apples doesn't ruin the whole bunch.
All public unions are a problem like that. That calls the teacher unions and everything. They always protect their groups much more, and they're using tax money to do it. It's a bigger problem than you're even making it out to be.
Or something stupid like a bad hamburger at McDonald's doesn't. That is literally what a police. It was either a police chief or a mayor said this week. That one bad hamburger doesn't ruin all the hamburgers at McDonald's. Yeah, but if you had a group that came in and went, okay, but let's make sure every time we find those bad hamburgers, we still sell them, we still put them out on the streets. But when the person comes back and goes, hey, not only did I get a bad hamburger, I got a second bad hamburger.
Yeah, but the analogy is even worse than you said, because that bad hamburger has a very good chance of infecting the other hamburgers. So it's even worse.
From the same hamburger person who made it the same way and made the exact same mistake, and they go, yeah, well, okay, we're just going to move them to a McDonald's in Hoboken. These abuses are serious, and they are being protected by police unions who have an incredible amount of leverage and unfortunately aren't above going, okay, well, we've made these decisions, either like it or we'll let more crime happen. We'll start protecting you less. And that's the agency.
The police don't really protect people. Sure, there might be a handful of times they do. That is very rare. Police are there to protect the law, the government, and uphold the government's rules. That's it. Even the Supreme Court ruled that the police have no duty to protect people.
You think we shouldn't defund? My goodness. But 4, and what a lot of this is about, is it's about reducing these state budgets that in most cases, or at least many, are in excess of $1 billion that are being used to militarize a police force, to give them this ridiculous gear, these ridiculous weapons that they don't go through the amount of training that you would have to in the military, that you don't.
I'm ex-military. You really don't get much training in the military either. Yeah, certain positions do. If you're in infantry, you get a lot more training. Or if you're cavalry, you get a lot more training on that type of... But overall, we don't get much training on weaponry.
We don't even have as good of crowd control training or de-escalation training as kids who are going overseas to war, who understand what a big deal it is. Not to say we've been perfect on this either. The military has a lot of problems, but we're starting to look at military training and go, why are we making the police another branch of the military, but not even at the minimum giving them the same amount of training? For example, what did we see last week with friggin' journalists getting hit? You know who takes very seriously the possibility of journalists getting caught in crossfire? People who are deployed in the military. They understand that's a...
I really wouldn't hold the military on a high status either. They do a lot of disgusting acts behind the scenes. The reason why they don't kill they make sure that reporters don't get shot or anything like that is because that's in the public eye, and they're protected when in the public eye, probably less than the police are. I haven't seen statistics on that, but they do a lot of disgusting things behind the scenes. Look at Oh, what's her name? I'll put her name on the screen.
Huge no, and you don't want to accidentally risk that happening. And by the way, I want to mention here, I'm lending my voice to this because I think it is important for especially white creators to be supported in a way that isn't, I'm explaining racism to black people. As I mentioned before, that would be a ridiculous approach to it. Don't do that. It's gross.
Yes, we should never explain racism to black people, but white people should have part of the conversation too. And we have to if we want to continue forward. We need disparate voices working together for a solution. We shouldn't reject anybody based upon skin color on any particular topic.
By far, I wouldn't even say I am even the best or most eloquent at explaining, though I hope you have a better understanding as we finish going through this. I do highly, highly recommend you check other sources, check other articles. I particularly liked, and I'm sure I'm regurgitating some of the information from John Oliver's episode this last Sunday, which the entire episode is available for free on YouTube. So I would check that out too.
I would suggest you check out C4SS. They're probably one of the best sources. It's called the Center for Stateless Society. They are a left-leaning anarchist group, but they support markets. Like me, I'm a market anarchist. They're probably one of the best, and a bunch of their books, like this one, is from them. This is one of the best books on the market.
All right, back to me getting mad and ranting and raving and yelling at you. Not you specifically, unless you're one of the people that I'm talking about, in which case you specifically. But probably not you specifically. Majority of the people watching, I hope, did not jump to such brash conclusions. These runaway budgets have somewhat blackmailed counties and states into saying, well, we put all the money there, so with that amount of money there, we have to have them solve that dollar amount's worth of problems. But they are not qualified to do it. So it is about taking away that excess of money and putting it into people like mental crisis workers.
You have too much faith in the government. That's not the reason why they keep doing it. They do it, for the most part, for control. I'm not going to say every single person in the government just wants control. There are good people within the government. But how do we know which ones are? Look up public choice theory within economics. It's a great introduction to talking about how rent seeking and rent extraction happens, where you have the rich and then you have the state, where they actually pay favors for one another to continue with their control of society. There's no reason to believe any action is done for the good of society, because they have the same motivations as anybody else.
Social workers. And there are a lot of cases where we should be sending those people instead of the police, perhaps with a police escort. Certainly if you're going to a mental crisis and things seem like it might be dangerous, whatever the details are, yeah, send them with protection. But it should be about sending them to protect the individual so they can best do their job and help somebody having a mental health crisis, as opposed to sending what is frankly mostly men who have decided you must respect me, and you continuing to have your mental health crisis around me I'm taking as a sign of disrespect. How dare you not respect my authority even as you feel like your whole world is falling apart? Oh, I'll just beat the crap out of you. And this is by no means just something I'm making up hypothetically. I'm literally thinking of videos I just saw. One of an individual who I believe is a 16-year-old boy whose mother asked them to do a welfare check on him, and when he wouldn't consent to being searched, when they went and they asked him how he was, and he's fine, and then they demanded to search him, when he refused, apparently a parent is waiving their child's rights to not being searched when they say, I need a welfare check, because they beat this kid down to the ground and forced it on him. And the mother has even said that she felt entirely betrayed. And in general, this is the sort of thing that needs to be trained out of police also. I also just watched another video recently where they found on a teenager, and I believe this kid was 14, on a teenager, they found a single Swisher Sweet cigar in their pocket. So yes, this individual had broken the law. And then, by this, what looked 2 to 3 times his size. I'm not kidding. We're talking about...
Okay. I totally agree with you. There's a lot of videos that I've seen. I just saw one recently where a guy called for himself he needed help. He was drugged out and he was probably having some type of a mental breakdown. And when the police were saying, come here, come here, come here, he just kept on walking around and walking around. He was never violent in the video. But a cop just walks up behind him and tases him and throws him to the ground and starts violently attacking him. That's not necessary. But I want to go even further than that. Like you were talking about authority. Where do they get that authority to do that to anyone? Where does legitimate authority come from? That's a conversation I want to have with you.
A big, burly, not all muscle, but a massive man on top of a rather lanky, small 14-year-old child, and the cop is striking this child, is punching this child, is trying to twist this kid into knots over a Swisher Sweet in the pocket. In general, there is a number of things that have to change, even when a law has technically been violated, but also we should be sending...
What is violating a law? Again, if the state is not legitimate, how do they have the right to make a law? Let me ask you this. Are all people equal? If all people are equal, then how does one person have the right over another? You might say majority vote, but let's just take a quick thought experiment of that. Let's take a community. Forget the state. The state doesn't exist in this community. And the majority of the people in the community get together and they vote the state into power. But there's a minority in there that don't. They don't even participate in the vote. Does the minority somehow get bound by what the majority decided? That's what the state is. When the founders of the United States government got together, or any government, you had not even a majority, you had a minority of people getting together and decide how the government will be run. Look up Lysander Spooner. He talks about how is it that he was bound by a document that he wasn't even alive when it was signed. The government is the only institution that we think that somehow agreements done by dead people still binds the people that are alive today. How does that happen?
Different people to be handling mental health crises, and frankly, anytime we're talking about children being involved, there should be a social worker on scene that police officers are held accountable to. Because that ginormous cop beating the crap out of this kid over a Swisher Sweet, you can expect that that's not a first-time behavior. It is something he felt empowered and protected to do, because once again, I have 11 weeks of training that say, I am the ultimate authority over you and your life, your well-being, and your bodily autonomy.
Nobody has authority over another. Yes, people might get into children. Parents do not have authority over their children. They're a steward for their children's safety. That's completely different.
I would get it in some situations. It's kind of like how widely we used to use the death penalty, where it's like, okay, I'm anti-death penalty, though I get it with some situations. However, you are sending people who are violently reacting to every situation or many situations as though they are taking down a violent offender who they know has just caused somebody else tremendous harm and is trying to do it again to another individual.
How does any individual have the right to just murder another? That's one of the big problems with the death penalty. Yes, the other big problem is very often innocent people get held up. We're never going to live in a perfect world. But a lot of the crime, the violence that happened, is systemic. If we get rid of these problems of inequality, which I'm not a socialist. Morally, I'm not a socialist. I don't think there's a moral problem with it. I think there's an efficacy problem. But that's something that, again, will take up a whole video itself, which I'm going to go into in the future. But If just by reducing the amount of laws that keep people poor, that alone will reduce the need for people to resort to crime.
Like, there, I kind of get using violence to stop violence. Kinda. Again, the level to which we're talking about, he had this kid pinned down.
I think in society, we teach people that violence is a good way to solve our problems. That's how we teach the state. The state uses violence to get its goals enacted, either through the military, the police, or anything else. Remember, any law that you ask for is backed by violence. Anything. If you want environmental protections, if the environmental protection is not, if a business doesn't follow that rule, how does the state enforce that rule? Through violence. So violence is always backed within the state, and I think it teaches others that violence is an adequate way to solve problems. I think we should end that. We need to work on more voluntary interactions, and there are actually a lot of good academics that did work on this. Eleanor Ostrom is a great one who pointed out how, besides the market and the state, there's a third community-based type institution that does not require any type of violence to solve collective action problems. And she won the Nobel Prize for that.
This kid was not going anywhere or harming anybody, and is just getting the crap beaten out of him because he wasn't flipping over and giving the guy his arm, which if you actually see the way he's being held down, I don't know how he would do that, but let's just say he's being absent and going, I'm not going to make this easy for you. Yeah, I still just don't think some cop in what looks like his 40s with 3 times the weight on a kid should be beating up the kid. I know, controversial, I know. There are too many calls, there are too many cases where people who are abusing their power and have this mindset of talking back to me in any way, asking questions, asking me why these things are happening to you. Are you disrespecting me? Or even just stop staring at me, you're mad dogging me, that's breaking a law, I'm going to arrest you. Another video that exists.
It's an old adage. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Anytime you're going to give a monopoly of force, no matter what changes you make, there's going to be abuse. Again, I don't think a perfect system could ever exist, but giving a monopoly of force to anything, giving a monopoly of anything, is not a good idea.
We're sending those people out to handle a way too wide range of problems as they wear a utility belt that would make Bruce Wayne go, Jesus Christ, I'm Batman, not a monster. Okay, maybe not the Frank Miller version of Batman, but many Batmans. Certainly Christian Bales. And by the way, it's not just blue states and blue areas trying this. Yes, when we go to Texas, Austin has been doing things where they are sending social workers and mental crisis workers, but you even get it in places like Dallas. These are places who are trying these new solutions, and in some cases are doing it because they're motivated by helping the police more than helping the community, which is also bananas. It shouldn't be about that, but they're basically going, man, we're giving these police a lot to do. We got to take a load off of these police. It's one way to get there, but my goodness, wouldn't it be amazing if police forces and cities and towns and counties were most interested in taking care of their citizens? That would just be excellent. But I dream. So defunding the police isn't about...
Again, I don't want the state to take care of citizens. I want the communities to take care of each other. I want the people to work with one another. That is a much better goal than the state, the government, taking care of citizens.
Anarchy. It's about that word that Republicans really, really hate, redistribution. Redistribution of resources, and it's not meant to be taken lightly as though we're saying, no, we're just saying we might throw $1,000 off of here into here. It is meant to be taken heavily. It is meant to send the message, things are so bad, we need to restart from the ground up in a phased approach, because if somebody is being murdered, we also need to take care of that. But absolutely, after centuries, where every couple decades, sometimes every decade, we're having to march for the same thing without seeing an improvement, at a certain point, you can't go with what you have and try to mend it down. You need to start from the bottom and work your way back. And it sends the clear message that you serve us. That job.
They don't serve anybody. They serve themselves. I wish there was a way that they served us. That's not the state. The state has given itself a monopoly of violence. You need to start questioning it even more than you do now. How, as I already asked, did they get this power?
That you are choosing to do, that job is something you are doing for us. We pay the taxes. You
don't pay taxes. Taxes are taken from you. I disagree with people that nobody could give taxes voluntarily, unless we talk about indoctrination. That's a different story. But I don't want to pay taxes. I don't think the government is necessary, and I think the government is just a gang. I don't want to give them money. It's taken from me. I'm not paying them. They're robbing me. But if I don't, they're going to beat me up. So please don't say pay taxes.
Return the value to us. Not for the police union, not for the bureaucrats, not for the politicians. You serve us. And that will mean that in some of these instances, people who were on the force will have to reapply for their job. It will mean that in some areas, you will have almost entire police forces replaced with fresh faces. Hopefully this time with much more diversity. But there is lots of nuance here. And as I said, the best ways to do it, we are still having conversations about. The current system in place doesn't work. Defund the police does not mean anarchy.
Again, stop using that word the way you are. Anarchy does not mean chaos.
What it specifically means is we are still working out in the same way that those of you who have liberal values much want things like Medicare for all or a better universal healthcare system.
No. Okay, that's another thing. We don't need government intrusion in our lives. The problem with the healthcare system in the United States is the government control of the healthcare system. That's a huge topic in itself. Yes, I actually believe Medicare for all is better than what the United States system currently has, but only slightly. The reason why it's better is the United States system right now has so much bureaucracy created by the government. Why can't we strip away those rules? Single-payer systems and the system in the United States, they were originally created not to make a better healthcare system. They were both created to increase the salaries of the doctors. Again, I'll leave a link below.
But we still don't know the exact details of how that would work and how it would have to change after passing to adjust for the problems that are unforeseen. Frankly, it's not even just liberals. Any policy anywhere, these are the kinds of things that we have to deal with. So if you call yourself a skeptic, maybe actually be skeptical.
Yes, I totally agree. Be skeptical. Even about the state. Please. The skeptic community rejects religion like they should, but they need to start looking at the other institution that kills more people than religion does. I'd like to end by saying I totally think you should all support Jimmy Snow's channel. He's a great YouTuber. I don't dislike him in any way. He has a big heart, and I think he's a good skeptic. I just wish him and the other skeptics that I watch would move their skepticism a little further along onto the state as well. So, thank you, everyone. All the links will be below. Thank you, and have a good time. See you soon. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you soon.